Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a technology that could, one day, literally edit diseases out of our DNA before we're even born. It's a truly revolutionary idea, but it's also deeply controversial, and it could completely reshape what it means to be human. So, could we really do it? Could we just delete disease from our genetic code? This is the exact question at the heart of a pretty groundbreaking analysis in the journal Nature. It imagines a future where we could, in theory, edit common illnesses right out of our family tree, for good. So let's unpack the science here and really understand just how powerful this could be.
All right, to get a handle on where this could all be going, we first have to understand where we are right now. What's the current state of play?
You know, gene editing isn't science fiction anymore. Not at all. Back in 2018, the whole world was shocked by the news of the first gene-edited babies. And today, embryos are already being screened for their genetic risks. But, and this is a huge but, the technologies we have right now are still pretty error-prone, and honestly, they're severely limited in what they can really accomplish.
The Nature analysis, though, it's looking at something totally different. A technology that would be a massive, massive leap forward. So let's get our terms straight and define exactly what we're talking about here. The key word here is polygenic. See, most common illnesses that we all worry about, things like heart disease, diabetes, or schizophrenia, they aren't caused by just one single faulty gene. No, they're influenced by hundreds, maybe even thousands of tiny genetic variations all working together. Heritable Polygenic Editing, or HPE, is this theoretical ability to go into an embryo and edit many of these variants all at once, making those changes permanent for every generation that follows.
To really put this into perspective, think about what we do now. Embryo selection. Basically, you create several embryos in a lab, and then you pick the one that has the best genetic profile. But the Nature analysis points out that this is, well, it's not very effective. You'd need a ridiculous number of embryos, maybe tens of thousands, to make a really meaningful dent in disease risk. HPE, on the other hand, it could theoretically make these huge, profound changes to just a single embryo.
And this is where the potential just becomes absolutely staggering. The researchers actually modeled what HPE could do for some of our most common and devastating diseases. The results are, well, you'll see.
Okay, let's just take a minute and focus on Alzheimer's. The average person right now has about a 5% chance of developing this disease in their lifetime. Now, according to the model, if you could edit just one key gene variant, the famous APOE gene, you could cut that lifetime risk almost in half, from 5% all the way down to just 2.9%. That is a massive impact from just a single tiny edit. But what if you could edit more? Well, the analysis predicts that editing the top 10 genetic variants associated with Alzheimer's would cause the risk to just plummet to less than 0.6%. That is a nearly 90% reduction. It would make the disease incredibly rare for that person. Just wow.
And this potential isn't just for Alzheimer's, not by a long shot. The model shows that for coronary artery disease, the risk could drop from 6% to just 0.1%. For type 2 diabetes, it could plunge from 10% down to 0.2%. The potential impact here across so many of our most common killers is, well, it's astronomical.
Okay, before we all get carried away planning this disease-free future, the paper is super clear about something. This is all theoretical, and the path from theory to reality, it is absolutely filled with enormous scientific challenges.
And we are a long way off. I mean, gene editing can cause what are called off-target mutations, unintended mistakes elsewhere in the DNA. We might edit a gene thinking it causes a disease and just be plain wrong. And changing one gene can have totally unintended side effects on completely different traits. That's a huge problem called pleiotropy. You see, this isn't like fixing a typo in a document. It's more like trying to rewrite a sentence in a giant, complex book that you've only partially read.
And this quote right here, it just gets to the absolute core of the problem. Pleiotropy is the norm. The very genes that might put you at risk for one disease could actually be protective against another, or they might play some crucial role in development that we don't even understand yet. Fixing one thing in a system as unbelievably complex as the human genome could just break something else in a really catastrophic way.
But let's say we could solve all of that. Let's say we overcame every single scientific hurdle. Well, then this technology would force us as a society to confront some of the most profound ethical questions you can possibly imagine.
The debate is just incredibly complex. On one side, you've got this argument for what's called procreative beneficence. It's the idea that we have a moral duty to give our children the best possible start in life. And maybe that includes a life free from terrible diseases. But on the other side, you have these really deep-seated fears about inequality, about a loss of human diversity, and the horrifying ghost of a new, high-tech eugenics.
I mean, this is the plot of countless sci-fi movies for a reason, right? One of the biggest, most immediate concerns is that if HMPE is expensive, it'll only be available to the wealthy. And that could create a permanent biological upper class. It could literally write social inequality into our DNA.
And what's really fascinating is what the model predicts about this inequality. This chart is tracking the gap between the health haves and have-nots. And here's the counterintuitive part. The model shows that inequality actually peaks when only a minority of people have access to HPE. A world where only some people can afford to edit out disease would be, mathematically, more unequal than a world where no one can. It's a pretty mind-bending idea.
And of course, here's the classic slippery slope. The exact same technology you'd use to lower the genetic risk for high blood pressure could, in theory, be used to target things that aren't diseases at all. What about height or muscle mass? Or, the most controversial of all, what about intelligence? That line between preventing an illness and pursuing something better than well gets incredibly blurry, incredibly fast.
So, given these monumental stakes, scientifically and ethically, the authors don't just throw up their hands and say ban it. Instead, they propose a very deliberate, very cautious path forward for how we might even think about developing this technology.
The path they lay out is all about being gradual and putting safety first. You'd start with years, maybe decades of extensive animal testing. Then, the very first human trials would only target the most clear-cut, absolutely devastating cases, like single-gene disorders that are always lethal in childhood. And only after decades of proven safety would we even begin to consider expanding to more complex conditions, and then finally, maybe to very limited polygenic editing for common diseases.
The whole idea here isn't to just rush headfirst into some genetically engineered future. It's about carefully, thoughtfully, weighing the potential to move from the random lottery of genetics to a conscious choice. But, and this is key, doing it with immense caution, with robust regulation, and with international oversight.
And that's really the main takeaway. These authors argue that the time for this global conversation isn't in 20 or 30 years when the technology might actually be ready. The time is now, before it's a real possibility. So we have time to build the ethical guardrails to manage it.
And in the end, it leaves us with the biggest question of all. This isn't just a scientific decision or a medical one. This is a question about our shared values, about our very definition of what it means to be human, and about what kind of future we want to build together. So, who gets to make that choice?